Yeah, well, welcome everyone. We're holding. We spoke a few weeks, last number of weeks, deriving the Noahide laws, right? Deriving them from different verses, etc. And again, we gave sort of an introduction, to all these laws, but we're going to get more specific. So now we're going to speak about the identity of an Noahide in regards to the idea of Ger Toshav, right? Which we're going to speak about. So now, the obvious question over here is, and I say obvious. I shouldn't necessarily say it's obvious because there are a lot of people that make mistakes. They butcher this idea. The idea, where the question is, what's a Noahide? Right? And practically, when it comes to practicality, how do we observe it? Now, you would think, okay, this is a relatively simple question. But the answer, as we always know, anyone who studies even a little bit of Torah, and we know that there's a lot of detail. Right? There's a lot of detail. And things are complicated. Things are not always, as they seem. And there are people who butcher these ideas. So we're going to see what this is, over the next number of classes. And there are going to be certain topics, we'll say, not necessarily related to what we're doing, but they are important. So we have to see, the context and everything. As we always mention, you have to understand, in context, with the sources, as well. So there's a question about this idea of Ger Toshav. Now, if we look at Deuteronomy chapter 7, verses 1 and 2, God over here says, when the Lord your God shall bring you into the land, you're going to possess it, you'll take out the nations, you get rid of the nations in front of you, the Hittites, the Girgashites, Amorites, Canaanites, and the Perizzites, the Hivites, Jebusites, 7 nations, greater and mightier than you. When the Lord your God shall deliver them up before you, you shall destroy them. God's going to put them in your hand. You're going to destroy them. You shall completely destroy them. You make no covenant with them. You don't show them anything. All right, the difference of opinion. When the Jews come in the land, what's the first thing they do? Do they make a king, or they destroy the 7 nations? But everyone agreed when they came into the land, that's their obligation. Right? They have to destroy these 7 nations, according to nature. To be able to. They're very powerful. Very, very powerful. So God says, I'm going to deliver them to you. Right? And you'll destroy them. Now, from this last verse, right, the last part of the verse here, what does it say? You shall make no covenant with them, nor shall you show them favor. Now, what does that mean? You shall not show them favor. So the Talmud tells us about Zohar 28, there are a number of prohibitions. Over here. One of them is the prohibition of settling idolaters in the land of Israel. It comes on the Rambam, the laws of idolatry, chapter 10, halacha 3 and 4. So the Rambam learns over here from the verse in Exodus chapter 43, verse 33, that it says that they, i.e. idolaters, do not dwell within your land, lest they cause you to sin against me and worship their God. So now it comes on the Rambam. I sort of got there a little bit too quick. The Rambam says like this. What do we learn out over here? The Rambam says, first of all, forbidden to sell them homes and fields in Israel. Now we're going to see, but we see that today, that, they're non-Jews, Christians, Muslims. Okay, Muslims aren't necessarily idolaters. We saw that. They don't land in Israel. Seemingly they don't land. Right? So we'll have to deal with that. But it's forbidden to sell them homes and fields. In Syria, you can sell them homes, not fields. You can rent them homes in Israel, provided a neighborhood of idolaters not established. Now we got a problem with that also today. Okay. Fewer than 3 homes does not constitute a neighborhood. It is, however, forbidden to rent them fields. In Syria, a person is allowed to rent them fields. Now again, practically speaking, there's a major issue here. What goes on in the land of Israel. Right, we'll see. But in general, the law is, you can't have neighborhoods of non-Jews here. Idolaters, specifically. You are allowed to sell them houses and fields outside of Israel. Now, what's the reason? Very simple. We don't know them. Right? We don't own them. Not our land. Totally not our land. Now, the Rambam makes a clarification. Even when it's permitted to rent houses to idolaters, it's only permitted to rent them. Right? For use as a dwelling. What are we worried about? They're going to bring idols into this. Torah in Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 26, tells me don't bring an abomination into your home. Right? So that should apply to a non-Jew also. Right? That's the whole question. Doesn't really apply to a Jew, and only a Jew, or does it even apply to a non-Jew? Seemingly over here, it applies to a non-Jew. They're allowed to rent them homes to use as storehouse, but for dwellings, what am I worried about? They're going to bring their God and hang them around. Right? Or a short little fat guy. They're going to put him down. They're going to put him there. That you can't do. You can't bring an abomination into your house. So therefore, you can't give them a house to live in, because that's what they're going to do. And that goes against what the Torah says. They're allowed to sell them, to rent them homes to use as storehouses. They're not living in it. So they're not going to put their, the short little fat guys in there. They're not going to put their guys to hang around there. Right? So that should be okay. Also, the Rambam says, it's forbidden to sell their fruit, grain, other produce while it's attached to the earth. You can sell them after they've been harvested, or on the condition they will be harvested. I think, again, when we look at these laws and what practically goes on, maybe two totally different things. But the whole point is we don't want to give them a portion in Israel. It doesn't belong to them. Totally doesn't belong to them. We'll see the status of the Ger Toshav. Right? But for idolaters, why let them be here? Right? Israel's not a democracy. It has nothing to do with democracy. Right? Israel is built on the laws of the Torah, or should be. Even today, people want to say, well, it's the only democracy in the Middle East. That may be true. Right? They're not really saying that much. Compared to all these rogue states and countries that you have. Right? But at the end of the day, anyone who's ever lived in Israel and all the bureaucracy and different things that go on here, right, it's far from being democratic in many ways. Right? Without going into that and going into politics and other things. But if it's already been harvested or in condition, the fruit, grain, all the produce is going to be harvested, and you're allowed to give it to them. Now, the question is, why is it forbidden, the Rambam said, to sell them land or anything attached to the land? What does the Torah tell me? Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 2. It says, don't show them favor. We read that before. Don't give them favor. What does it mean? The Talmud explains, it means do not give them a resting place in the land. As long as they don't have a resting place in the land, their stay is going to be what? Temporary. Their stay 100% is going to be temporary. We don't want them here. We're not interested they're going to be here. But if they want to be here, it's temporary, this and that, okay? It's also forbidden to give them a present. Right? Showing favor. Another aspect of that, which most people don't know, and certainly not aware, is to say, this non-Jew, great athlete. I love the way he shoots the ball. Also, can't show them any favor. Now, what about a Noahide? I mean, we shouldn't be looking up to these people anyway. You know, what they do in their private lives probably totally horrific, right? But people like to watch. Like to watch football, basketball, other than entertainment, whatever it is. For personal sake, I don't learn from them. You know, you go to their ball games, you're supporting them. You know, but you see, but I differentiate between what they, you know, how they play and what they do off the field. We don't hold that way. But in general, is that going to be forbidden for a non-Jew? No, not going to be forbidden. Would I say it's a moral imperative? Yeah. I did one of my Q&A last week. I spoke about it. Yeah, I spoke about this. I spoke about it a lot, but I came up last week. Someone asked me to. So as a non-Jew, you're not liable. You don't have an obligation to learn Torah like a Jew does. So, you know, what would be the prohibition even for a Jew? Wasted time when you could have learned Torah. Right? Unless there's immorality going on or other things. For non-Jew, you don't even have that. So it should be okay. But what's the moral imperative? The moral imperative is we always have to keep in mind. Am I doing something that's drawing me closer to God? Or is it taking me further away? And now, some people may say, I'm a better person by watching football. I beg to differ. Right? I definitely don't think that's the case. Right? So forget about being a waste of time. That's one issue. Right? But, you know, these things like addictive. Anyone who's a sports fan is addicted. He wins or don't, whatever. You have to watch. Right? So, the question is, by non-Jews, is it forbidden? No. Would I say, again, my opinion, would I say it's a moral imperative? Yeah. Because a lot of these things do not help me draw closer to God. At all. So what it does is the opposite. It comes along the code of Jewish law, Shulchan Aruch, you know how the codifiers will agree with the Rambam. Right? Stay clear. That's prohibited for idolaters settled permanently in Israel. Now, selling property to non-Jews in Israel, we're saying it's forbidden if they're going to live there. Renting property, there's a lot of disagreement. Right? Even outside of Israel. But we are lenient. Things we're lenient over here. The non-Jews allowed to rent. Not allowed to own. But they're allowed to rent. Now, the caveat over here is, when does this apply? This only applies when Israel has sovereignty and authority over non-Jews in Israel. That's when it applies. If we have sovereignty. Right? So if we have sovereignty, fine. You're going to say, well, don't we have sovereignty today? True. Right? We would say we have sovereignty today. Nonetheless, it's the government, without getting political, is the government running according to Torah? No. You got a prime minister wears the yarmulke on his head, wears the skull cap. You know, it doesn't look too religious to me. A lot of decrees that he's making. So, even if that's true and that's a halakha, well, we got a problem. We got a problem because that's not what happens. But the custom is that it only applies when we have sovereignty over the land. We don't have sovereignty over the land. What are we talking about? Right? We'll be exempt from all this. Now, when you look at the last part of what the Rambam says, the Rambam says regarding gifts. Now, the Torah, Deuteronomy chapter 14, verse 21 says, you should not eat improperly slaughtered meat. You should give it to the ger within your gate so he may eat it. You're giving a gift over here. Right, but what's this ger talking about? Can't be a convert. Talking about a convert, you can't give him non-kosher meat. So the verse over here says, a Jew is going to give a gift. Improperly slaughtered meat to a ger. Now, someone's going to say, a ger within your gates. Right, a ger means a convert. Right, in general. But it can't be. Why not? Because if a convert is like a born Jew, even though there are certain things we mentioned before that a convert can't do, even though he's a full-fledged Jew, there are certain limitations. Nonetheless, in general, he's like a born Jew in his obligation. Certainly, when it comes to observed dietary law. Right? So therefore, it cannot be talking about a convert. It can be talking about some other ger, whatever this ger is, we'll see. because he doesn't have an obligation to keep dietary laws. If, however, this verse speaks of a non-Jew, it's going to be referring to a non-Jew who's not an idolater. Why? Because he can't have a portion of the land. Otherwise, how is the Jew allowed to gift the meat to the non-Jew? We just learned the Jew can't favor an idolater with gifts. So by process of elimination, we'll understand it's talking about who? Right? It's talking about a non-Jew who does not hold by adultery. Right? He gives up idolatry. So now we understand, now we're going to see further, that the Torah here understands that there's going to be non-idolatrous Gentiles living in Israel. What do we call them? It's interesting. Non-idolatrous Gentiles. It doesn't sound so nice. Right? Ger Toshav. That's what we call it, Ger Toshav. Right? Sounds better. And we got a number of verses. Exodus chapter 12, verses 43 to 45. This is to create a Passover offering, a resident, i.e. Toshav. The high laborer may not eat of it. Right? And not a Jew. Leviticus chapter 25, verse 6. The land yield of sabbatical year shall be yours to eat. And the resident, Toshav, who lives there among you, can also eat from it. Not talking about a Jew over it. Right? A convert. Talking about a Ger Toshav. Leviticus chapter 25, verse 35. Shall strengthen in the convert or the resident Toshav. Leviticus 25, verse 40. Like a laborer or resident, i.e. Toshav, he shall be with you until the Jubilee year, he shall work for you. Leviticus chapter 25, verse 45. Also from among the children of the resident who shall dwell with you. Leviticus chapter 25, verse 47 means a sojourner, i.e. a ger, who resides, i.e. Toshav, among you. And number 35, verse 15, for the children of Israel, the convert and the resident. Convert, again, what are we talking about over here? We're talking about a Ger Toshav. Now, if we look at the root of the word ger, the root of it is gar, kuf, gimel, resh. What does gar mean? It means to sojourn, to live. And that wasn't talking about someone who's an alien, stranger, immigrant. That's what Abraham says. He says to the people of Chet when he wants a burial place for his wife. He says, I'm a Toshav, a Ger Toshav, right? The Ger Toshav, I'm a stranger. I'm a resident alien over here. A non-Jew resides in the land of Israel amongst the Jewish people. Now, obviously, there's a question, what does he have to do? What does he have to get rid of? I.e., he can't be an idolater, is that enough? Or do we say he's going to hold by the Noahide laws as well? Right, that we're going to see. So if you go through Talmudic literature, the Medrash, Mishnah, Gemara, you go through halachic literature, and a Ger Toshav, 100% is not a Jew. There are many benefits. There are many benefits he gets that also reside for Jews that reside in Israel. But he's involved with many of the same restrictions that apply to idolaters. Now we're going to look at, okay, what does it mean? He lives in the land. So, an idolater, right, is not allowed to live in the land. Ger Toshav is, even permanently. But there are a number of conditions. First condition, he's got to be settled in a place where he can make a living or practice his trade. Second condition, he's not permitted to live near the borders of Israel, only well into the interior. Third thing, he's allowed to sell land in Israel to a Ger Toshav. Can't sell it to an idolater, but can sell it to a Ger Toshav. Once settled there, fourth thing, Jews can't force him to move from one place to another. But he can relocate if it's a benefit to him. And the fifth thing is, Ger Toshav may not reside in Jerusalem. Right? That's an interesting thing, that there's a medrash that holds the Ger Toshav not allowed to live within boundaries of any established city, but Maimonides, the Rambam, and the Tosefta only prohibit the dwelling of a Ger Toshav within Jerusalem. Doesn't say anything about restriction of living anywhere. So if the Rambam Coffman agrees with the Ravid over here. Why is he going to single out a prohibition against living in Jerusalem? Why? Why is that prohibition singled out? Could be that doesn't acknowledge the general prohibition against residing in cities. There's no discussion whether a Ger Toshav can live, if he can live in a city or not. Now, the Gemara says that the Jewish community is forbidden to provide medical treatment or even saving the life of an adult. The Rambam qualifies it saying Jews can offer an adult a medical treatment. Denial of it would disrupt peace. But you're only allowed to do it for money. Now, you're going to say, wait a minute. Why can't he save it? Why can't he save over here? Right, if they're going to hate us more, you don't save him. Makes sense. You want to keep the peace. So we want to keep the peace. Right, but the Gemara asks the question, and this is one of the things Messianics and others rip the Talmud for because that's what they do. And they'll say we're so cruel to non-Jews. And the Talmud says you're not allowed to save a non-Jew on child. Now, obviously, that statement needs clarification. Right, but it's one of the many statements, Messianics, and Christians take way out of context. You're going to say, wow, it's so cruel. Oh, I hate non-Jews, you're going to let them die on Shabbos. Can't save them on Shabbos. The halacha is not that way, but why does the Talmud say that? So interesting enough, since they don't know how to read, even if it's in English, they don't know how to read. Why? Because if you look at what that piece of Talmud says, the entire piece of Talmud over there is asking the question, if a Jew is drowning on Shabbos, are you allowed to save him? Now, there are a number of questions here. Is the Jew Shomer Shabbos? Does he keep Shabbos? Why am I allowed to save him? I'm allowed to save him. You know why? Because I know he's going to keep Shabbos in the future. If he doesn't keep Shabbos in the future, why should I save him? Say, if I save him, maybe he'll repent. Maybe he'll do tshuva. Is a non-Jew going to keep Shabbos? No. You're obligated to keep Shabbos? No. But that's not the question. Most of that piece of Talmud over there, what's it talking about? It's talking about, am I allowed to save the Jew? Back and forth. Yes, no, why not, this, that. Back and forth. At the end, the Talmud throws in there, what about a non-Jew? What about a non-Jew? So, these idiot Messianics and Christians say, hey, look what the Talmud says against non-Jews. They're going to let a non-Jew drown on Shabbos, and they don't care. Look how cruel we are. Maybe we are cruel, but that's not what the Gemara says. The Gemara goes into detail. Why am I allowed to save the Jew? It's not the question, why can't I save a non-Jew? That's thrown in there as a bonus. But that's not what the Talmud's talking about. Right? The Talmud's back and forth. Am I allowed to save the Jew? I'm not allowed to save the Jew. Why? Why not? This, that. And by the way, what about a non-Jew? You would think that the entire piece of Talmud is talking about all these negative things about non-Jews, and we're going to let them drown. Nah. They're going to drown. Who cares? Let them die. What are we talking about? Right? One of my personal pet peeves is when people take things way out of context. Right? I did a bunch of videos on Tanakh Talk, on a lot of these topics. I broke them down. And said, okay, what does the Talmud say? What's the claim, and what's it really talking about? Right? What's really the case? They quote one line. It's like someone speaks for 2 hours, and they splice it, and they bring one thing that he says, but take it totally out of context. Way out of context. That's what they do. That's what these Messianics, these Christians do. So it's not a question, am I not allowed to save the non-Jew? Right? That gets thrown in as a bonus. The question is, how am I allowed to save the Jew? I'm not allowed to save the Jew. I should be allowed to save the Jew. It should be forbidden for me to save the Jew. Or maybe it's permitted. I don't know. Maybe it is. Maybe it isn't. Right? So why do I mention all that? Because here, what are we talking about? We're prohibited from providing medical treatment or even saving the life of an adult. If I save them, what am I worried about? They're going to praise their idol for being saved. So if you have to save them because of peace, charge them. Are you allowed to charge them? Right? Technically, you let them drown. Or a Jew, for that matter. Let them drown. Forget Shabbos. Let them drown. We know he's not going to keep Shabbos anyway. He's not going to repent over here. Maybe he will, but he probably won't. Why should I save him? He's an idolater. I don't care what he knows, what he doesn't know. Is it my fault he worships the cow? What do you want from me? I should be out there banging down the doors, putting up signs, Noahide Nations, black, whatever. We got to save all these people that are worshiping cows. So, didn't God give everyone a brain? I don't think these people are mentally challenged. They're misguided. If they're mentally challenged, they're exempt. But if they're misguided, okay, so they can be misguided. Right? But, you take something way out of context. You say, oh, you can't even save a non-Jew. You're going to let a non-Jew drown. No, we're going to let a Jew potentially drown because he doesn't keep Shabbos. And then we're going to say, oh, what about a non-Jew? But non-Jew doesn't keep Shabbos. Non-Jew doesn't keep Shabbos. Right? So if he doesn't keep Shabbos, why would I save him? But that's not even the question. Why would I save the Jew? That's the question. So, sustaining the Ger Toshav, what does that mean? It means Jews are commanded to sustain the Ger Toshav to ensure his welfare as a fellow Jew. Is he Jewish? No. But he's living amongst Jews, gave up idolatry, and keeps the Noahide laws, as we'll see. So you're going to help him. For example, if he's in danger, we have to do whatever we can to save him. Right? So too, if he's, having difficulty financially, we should help him. Try and raise money. Support him with charity. Right? That's what we should do. That's one thing. Second thing is, Jews are commanded to ensure his welfare and may even provide to get Toshav free medical care if necessary. Bottom line, get take care of him. Get take care of him. He's sick. Financially, he's got problems. Third thing, a Jew may even on Shabbos assist the Ger Toshav and give birth. Right? Even though you're not really allowed to violate Shabbos to do so, nonetheless, you can help. Jews can give gifts to Ger Toshav. Again, they are not idolaters. So Ger Toshav, I can give a gift to. And the fifth thing over here is that a Jew can go beyond the minimal social graces required for peace when interacting with a Ger Toshav. With idolaters, not the case. Okay? With an idolater, I give the minimal degree of courtesy. Right? Needed to maintain peace and civility. Ger Toshav may be treated the same etiquette, kindness, grace afforded to other Jews. Now, what's the problem? What are we getting at over here? Now, right, this is, December 26th. It's, their holiday and all that. We don't celebrate it. So I don't need to rub it in their face. So if I'm out and about, and I see non-Jews, be courteous. Can't say married December 25th. Can't say that. Can't say season's greeting. Right? But again, technically speaking, you only have to show a minimal degree of courtesy. Right? But if a person sees that that's what you do and that's how you act, they say all Jews do this or all Jews do that. Obviously, that's forbidden. That's racist. Very true. But we don't need to antagonize. If they get in discussion, why don't you believe in JC and this and that? That's one thing, right? I can say good morning. There's a famous story with Rabbi Chaim Coffman. He was walking to synagogue. Right? First person he would see was a nun, and he said good morning. You don't have to spit at them. No mitzvah to spit at them. Right? It's just no courtesy. Right? Again, it can be a minimal degree of courtesy. But if it's going to make us look bad if we don't say anything, then obviously, we should be nice. We don't have to be mean over here. But our obligation, technically speaking, is I don't have to go beyond the letter of the law for anything. Right? Why do they deserve that? Right? Ger Toshav, different thing. We should give them proper etiquette, show them proper etiquette, kindness, just like other Jews. Right? And hopefully other Jews show other Jews that. Right, but an idolater, they spit in God's face on a regular basis. I have to show them courtesy. All right, to show them courtesy. People say live and let live. No. All right, let's make clear. There are things that are absolutely wrong that God hates. One of them is idolatry. I don't care. They're born that way. They're brainwashed. They were never taught anything. Okay, most of the people I deal with that want to convert came out of the church because it didn't make sense. A lot of things didn't make sense. So what happened? They thought, they looked into things. They thought they were lied, they were duped, all these different things. So if that's the case, I have to be nice to them. I have to be nice to them. Look how many Jews have died, been murdered, tortured in JC's name. Nice. But yeah, for the sake of peace, we should be nice. But how far does that go? I don't, the obligation does not go that far. Right? But again, if you're in public, you see somebody, and they're idolaters. Right? A lot of people are idolaters. Doesn't mean I have to spit at them. Doesn't mean I can just give them a bad look. Right? Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky would wish a nun good morning every day. A nun! Yeah, so I don't have to go out of my way to be obnoxious. I mean, I'm good at that. Okay, but we don't have to go out of our way for people like this. But for the sake of peace, that's what the Rambam says. All right? For the sake of peace, we should. But I'm not obligated, right? That's the point. I'm not obligated over it. But for peace, it's a good thing. Torah also commands the Jews in a number of mitzvahs, ensuring Ger Toshav a degree of equanimity in civil and monetary law. Right? These mitzvahs also guarantee protection for earned wages, other things. In short, we're looking out for the Ger Toshav. Right? There's also an obligation for Jews to establish courts, adjudicate disputes between Ger Toshav according to the laws. Right? No different than Noahide. But that's only the case. And the Rambam says, or the Rabaz over there says, that that's only where the Ger Toshav does not establish their own court. Their own court will be basically Noahide. Now, what does the Ger Toshav do? What does he believe in? He doesn't worship idols, right? So he's not an idolater, right? But there's since he doesn't worship idols, so we're not worried. They're not subject to laws based on concern for idolatry. Right? For example, we don't accept an oath from a regular non-Jew, from an idolater. Why? We're afraid he's going to swear in that name. He's going to swear in the name of that false thief. But Ger Toshav we can accept because he believes in one God. Right? He denies idolatry. Now, technically speaking, by a Muslim, we can say the same thing. There are some that claim certain aspects of Islam may be idolatry, but the vast majority hold that that's not the case. So we should be able to accept from them also. Right? And no, so they're not idolatry. The wine of idolaters, if they touch it, prohibited for both benefit and consumption if it's dry. Right? If it's cooked, not a problem. Right? Because they wouldn't put it on their altar if it was cooked. But if it's semi-dry or dry, you're not allowed to touch it. Right? You're not allowed to touch it if it's open. Right? The bottle is open. If they take the bottle when it's open and pour it, you can't drink the bottle. You can't drink it. Right? We'll call that in my language spiritual kudi. They can't do it. They're not allowed to. However, the wine of Ger Toshav only prohibited for consumption. Still can't drink it because they're a non-Jew. At the same time, I can get benefit from it. By an idolater, right? If he touches it, I can't get benefit. I flush on the toilet. No difference than a secular Jew. Secular Jew touches wine that's not cooked, dry wine or semi-dry wine. Also, same thing as idolater, right? Not only can you drink it, you have to get rid of it. You cannot get benefit from it. Now, there are a few instances in the Torah that are unrelated to idolatry, which Ger Toshav is regarded differently than in idolatry. For example, the Rambam in the laws of murder, chapter 5, halachas 3 to 4, talks about the exile of a Ger Toshav who unintentionally kills another Ger Toshav. Let's say, one example. But in every other aspect, Ger Toshav is treated like an idolatry. There are exceptions. We mentioned a few exceptions. A number of instances, I might have thought otherwise, sources make certain to reinforce it. I.e., first of all, a Jew may lend to a Ger Toshav on interest. Just like an on. A Jew's not allowed to lend money to a Jew with interest, but he's allowed to lend a non-Jew. So a Ger Toshav, same thing, right? He's got the status of a non-Jew, even though he's not an idolater. He can lend him with interest. A Jew who has to sell himself into servitude, right? He stole. Now he has to be a slave. They only sell himself to another Jew or a convert, right? He's not allowed to serve a Ger Toshav, right? Or he's not allowed to serve a non-Jew, not even a Ger Toshav. A Ger Toshav holds by Noahide laws, or he goes against idolatry. Okay, but a Jew who's gonna now be in servitude cannot sell himself to them, right? To a non-Jew again. During Shemitah year, which is this year, sabbatical year, they're not allowed to work the land. Does not cancel debts of a Ger Toshav. All right. In other words, for a Jew, cancels debt. Person has debt, sabbatical year wipes it out. All right, but we get around this problem because when we get close to sabbatical year, no one will lend money. Came along Hillel, and Hillel came up with an idea called the Prohibition. What's the Prohibition? It's a statement in front of three people, three kosher Jews, basically saying if he owes money to somebody, comes the laws of Shemitah, like comes the sabbatical year, doesn't uproot it. He's still got to pay it, because otherwise no one ever lend money to people. If the closer it gets to sabbatical year, they're going to say, "Oh, great, I'm going to lend you money. You're not going to pay it back sabbatical year," and wipes it up. All right, so Hillel came up with this idea, and that's what we do. Some people write this document right before Rosh Hashanah, right past Rosh Hashanah. They write this document. Some do right before next Rosh Hashanah. Biblically, Ger Toshav is like a non-Jew with regard to the laws of Torah. Right? They don't become impure. Right? No impurity by a non-Jew will be. But there are a number of biblical decrees that are exceptions for a Ger Toshav. Ger Toshav cannot eat the Passover sacrifice. Right? Not allowed to eat that. Right? Status of a non-Jew. Jews may not accept funds from a Ger Toshav for rebuilding or upkeep of the temple complex. Right? As well. Jews have no commandment to correct or rebuke a Ger Toshav. Now, it's kind of difficult considering that the Rambam holds an obligation to compel observance of the Noahide laws. It could be that obligation is only enforced so the non-Jews accept the 7 Noahide laws, and he's liable for his own observance of them. But there is a question I've gotten hammered a number of times. Where someone says, you, the Jewish people, are light into nations, so therefore light into nations, you've got an obligation to educate non-Jews. So my Rebbe's got one of the longest responses he ever wrote on this topic. He said, who's like an obligation? Doesn't say anywhere. Right? Maybe the Rambam brings it down. I don't know, but it doesn't say anywhere. Not in the Torah. Not in the oral law. Doesn't say anywhere an obligation to work on non-Jews. The Noahide laws are universal laws. They're laws the person can figure out. Right? In general. You need someone to teach you, fine, but a lot of them you could have figured out. So when a person gets upstairs after 120 years, not to say, Joe non-Jew, how come he didn't keep the Noahide laws? Never heard the Noahide laws. What are you talking about? He said, well, the Noahide laws say, one of the laws says don't steal. And, you cheat on your taxes. You did other things. That's stealing. No, that's different. It said don't do this. So these things are obvious. If they're obvious, why do I have to reach out to non-Jews? I got plenty of people, in India, with have internet, long time, short time, this, that. People find me, Bangladesh, all kinds of other places, right, all over the world. So, if a person's thinking, they'll come to this realization. If they're really thinking, they're really searching. If not, they'll worship cows. They'll worship sugar fat people. Okay, what can I do? Right? My obligation is to go out there and educate them. Gotta put up signs, next to every bar that's near a church. Come on. That's my obligation. Oh, so someone comes out and says, but you're a light into the nation. Markesha. What's the connection? Let's say better. What's my obligation to reach out to other secular Jews? To do outreach for secular Jews don't know anything about Judaism. You know what the obligation is? The Talmud says, "Kol Yisrael Reagan Zelazeh." All Jews are intertwined. Doesn't say that by non-Jews. All non-Jews are intertwined. So that means I took out from my friend. I have to bring back his soul. I have to save his soul, quote unquote. All right, bring him back to the soul. All right, now that being the case, that I have an obligation because we're all intertwined. How do I know we're all intertwined? All right, very simple. If a Jew does something wrong anyway, secular Jew, religious Jew, all Jews get blamed. You don't see that by anyone else. Maybe there are people racist against blacks. Black does something, they all blacks did. Yeah, that's racism. They said it against Chinese, Koreans, others. But see, if an Italian in Brooklyn did something egregious, no one's saying, we're burning down the Italian flag, we're going to kill all the Italians. No more cannolis. It's over. No more cannolis. No, it never happened. Oh, a Jew does something wrong, we're going to kill all Jews. Okay? We're against all Jews. Why? What does that have to do with anything? Secular Jews killed in the Holocaust, they couldn't understand. He said, hit me, and they say he blotted out, may rot wherever he is. He didn't care. You had a quarter Jewish blood, half Jewish blood. He didn't care. Totally didn't care. Right? But they said, but we're like you. We marry your women, we fight your wars, we watch your football game, all these things. They didn't care. They couldn't understand. Why are you killing us? Right? Kill those Jews that are, totally different. Like Orthodox Jews, demolish them, not us. We're like, we're like you. Hitler said doesn't matter. He killed everybody. Right? That's what he did. Or he tried. So we're all intertwined. Right? We do something wrong, anybody. Any Jew does something wrong, gets hammered. Hammered. Right? Rebel wine should be well. Once said on the radio here in Israel, he said Orthodox Jews are vilified. They were called cockroaches, sponges, parasites, all kinds of things. Secular meeting has against them. So Rebel Wine once said, if you would take out the name ultra-Orthodox Jew and put in Arab, it would have been uprising years ago. Years ago. But we're not getting into politics. Right? So the point is, the verse is in the book of Leviticus that said, there's an obligation for a Jew to rebuke to rebuke who? Es Amisecho. Your people. Now, if I was a Karaite, what would I say? Karaites don't believe in oral law. What would I say if I was a Karaite? I would say that means, very simple, a Jew has an obligation to rebuke who? A Jew. Your people, not non-Jews. Totally not non-Jews. I spoke about this last night for a while when I gave a class in Pirkei Avos on ethics of our father. I spoke a lot about this. But the point is, if my obligation is to rebuke other Jews, and I learned it out from that verse, just because Jews are light in the nation, where do you see from that? Where do you infer from that my obligation is to run around convincing or trying to convince every single non-Jew to be a Noahide? Now, I would agree, as Ray has said a number of times, I would agree that the more Noahides that are out there, the less anti-Semitism. That I would agree. Is it going to eradicate anti-Semitism? No. Because Esav ate Yaakov, not going to eradicate it forever. You're going to wait for the Messiah to come. But to tell me, based on a crummy, stupid inference, and to tell me, you're like a nation, you're light as the nation, that's my obligation to reach out to non-Jews. Do me a favor. Learn how to learn Torah. It doesn't make any sense at all because of that. Right? But I got an explicit verse that says, your people, not non-Jews. An obligation to rebuke non-Jews. Right? Might be that the Rambam says that the obligation to compel them to keep the law. Right? He's going to be unique over here. Because most rabbinic authorities are not going to agree with it. Totally not going to agree with it on that. So the Talmud continues in Avodah Zarah 64b. There's a three-way dispute. How a Gentile becomes a Ger Toshav. First opinion is Rabbi Meir. What does Rabbi Meir say? Rabbi Meir says a Ger Toshav is a non-Jew who has before three Torah scholars in front of a Beis Din, right, accepts upon himself not to worship idols. That's the first opinion. Comes along the Chachamim, the majority of sages. Second opinion is the Ger Toshav is a non-Jew, goes in front of three Torah scholars. Remember, there's an obligation for a Ger Toshav to go in front of three scholars, in front of a Beis Din. I Noahide, if you want to do it, okay. I'm not going to say you can't do it. I already got in trouble for that, right? I'm not going to say you can't do it. You know, you want to strengthen yourself, it makes you feel good, fine. Obligation? No. No obligation, only for a Ger Toshav. The Ger Toshav only applies a sabbatical year as well. But, says the Chachamim, the majority of sages, a Ger Toshav is a non-Jew before three Torah scholars, before Beis Din, accepts upon himself to observe 7 Noahide laws. Oh, that's different. He's not just denying idolatry, he's holding by the Noahide law. Comes along the others, Acherim as they're known. Third opinion is, a Ger Toshav is a non-Jew accepted all of the commandments of the Torah. They didn't accept the prohibition of eating the Beilah, which is meat that they're properly slaughtered according to Torah. So 3 opinions over here. Now, there are multiple opinions that may be acceptable matters of history or homiletics. Right, a lot of sources for this. But we only accept a single idea as binding a matter of practice. Meaning, I could have 10 opinions. You know, I could have Rabbi Akiva's opinion, Rabbi Yishmael's opinion. You know, I could have many different opinions. Normally, halacha is like the Chacham, like the majority says. Right? So even if I have 10 opinions, we're going to use one opinion in the matter of Jewish law practice. So one of the major rules for deciding halacha, how do we decide who's right, is that we go according to the majority. Right? We go according to the majority. So Chachamim are the majority. So therefore, the halacha goes like them. Now, there are later scholars. There are later scholars that decide halachic practice, you know, in every generation, in accordance with the Chachamim. So what do they say? They say Ger Toshav is a non-Jew accepted before 3 scholars, i.e. before a Beis Din. Not just they deny idolatry, they keep all the Noahide laws. However, Rashi seems to be inconsistent. He's inconsistent what a Ger Toshav is. In a number of places, what does Rashi say? He says like Rabbi Meir, in the fact that they only accept upon themselves not to worship idols. Rashi, though, rules like the Chachamim in Avodah Zarah 24b. So the question is, we have a contradiction. We have a contradiction. What does Rashi really hold? Does he hold like Rabbi Meir or the Chachamim? So many rabbinic authorities hold that Rashi has to hold like the Chachamim. Right? He has to go according to the majority. Right? How could he go against the basic tenets? Right? That would be totally incomprehensible. Right? In other words, basic tenets is to go according to the majority. Right? So the difficulty lies in explaining why Rashi goes similar like Rabbi Meir. Why it's only against the idolatry, not all the Noahide laws. Right? Why does it keep all the Noahide laws? So a lot of rabbinical authority tried to explain, try to understand Rashi, but seemingly, as we know, like many things, complicated. Right? They haven't really succeeded over here. So the most famous explanation of Rashi is that of the Be'er Sheva. Right? The Be'er Sheva commentary in the Talmud, style like Tosis, question and answer type of thing. Right? It was authored by Rabbi Chaim Be'er Eulenberg, Chief Justice of the Rabbinical Court of Gorizia, Italy, in 16th century or 16th, 17th century. And according to Beersheba, right, what does he say? He says that the Gemara and the Avodah Zarah 64b, what does it say? Right, that's the three opinions we mentioned before. It's part of a whole bigger conversation about when Jews are obligated to support non-Jews who live amongst them within Israel. In other words, it's based on a much bigger topic. He comes on the Beersheba and he says, Rashi really goes with the Chachamim. He goes with the majority, only regarding providing support to a Ger Toshav. That is an obligation. But the Beersheba says, Rashi can go like Rabbi Meir for other matters affecting the Ger Toshav. So, in many times where Rashi appears to go like Rabbi Meir, there is an issue, though, contradicted by another comment in Rashi in Tractate Erechim 29a. Here Rashi seems to apply Rabbi Meir's criteria, even for the sake of defining the Ger Toshav for communal support. Again, another contradiction. Right? So, comes on the Rambam, Torah, the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, all record the position of the Chachamim as conclusive. If it's become a Ger Toshav, you must, non-Jews going to accept 7 Noahide laws in front of a basin of 3 qualified scholars. Right? So here, it's a common thing where, you can have a major disagreement of opinion, especially among one scholar, maybe say one way, say the other way at the same time. So it has to be understood. But even if you have a whole bunch of different opinions, we have to go according to a single opinion according to Jewish law. Right? That's going to, in every generation, rabbinic scholars are going to interpret the law. They have the right. Right? As we see in the book of Deuteronomy. And a lot of people have difficulty with this. And that is, you listen to the Kohanim in every generation. The Kohanim are the rabbis. You got to listen to what they say in every generation. Right? So here it's conclusive. Right? We go like the Chachamim, we go like the majority. Right? How does the non-Jew become a Ger Toshav? So I guess that's sort of introduction, to a Ger Toshav. But let's make one other thing clear. Anybody who tells you today there's a status of a Ger Toshav, they're lying. We made clear before, the status of a Ger Toshav is only when there's a sabbatical year. That's it. Nothing else to say. Why do some people think, idiotically, that, they can apply Ger Toshav to them? I don't know. I don't have a good answer. They're foolish. They don't know practical law, okay? I have the rivet down your throat, but they don't know what they're talking about. Right? So a Ger Toshav today doesn't apply. It doesn't apply because we don't have a sabbatical year. But if someone were to become a Ger Toshav, that's how you become a Ger Toshav, and these are the things that Jews have an obligation to do for non-Jews. Right? The non-Jews will either keep the Noahide laws or denounce idolatry, whatever the definition over here is. But we have a number of obligations that Jews have, towards the Ger Toshav. So I guess that's going to be part 1. I guess we'll continue with part 2 next week. Someone here points out Moshe was also called a Ger. You're right, because he's a stranger. Right? It also means a stranger. Right? Avram called himself a stranger. Right? As we mentioned before. Right? By the children of Chet, when he wanted a burial place for Sarah. Right? So there are cases. We have people called a Ger, but again, we have very specific places here where it said that he's a sojourner and he lives there. Right? So it's talking about a non-Jew, obviously, denies idolatry and or keeps the Noahide law. So any questions? Make any questions? Any questions on any of that? Or any general questions? All right, so no other questions. I guess that I'm going to sign out. Anyone has any questions, you can send me an email at Rabbi Chaim Coffman at gmail.com. Again, do apologize for being late. So next week, I guess we'll continue with Ger Toshav Part 2. And wish everyone a good middle of the day or towards the end of the day, depending where you are. And everyone have a great week.